February 15th, 1971. And your mum stood at the Lewis's till fumbling with coins that didn't make sense anymore. Sixpence wasn't sixpence. It was 2.5 new pence instead, which nobody could calculate fast enough while shopkeepers held up conversion charts and elderly customers counted unfamiliar money with suspicion. Banks had just reopened after 4 days closed for the changeover, and Birmingham woke to decimal currency nobody quite understood yet. Subscribe to see the Birmingham that only exists in memories now. 10 moments that defined growing up here in the 1970s. Shops displayed every price twice. Old money on one ticket and new money on another, while Woolworths installed conversion tables at every till, and the butcher on the high street wrote both amounts in chalk on his board, crossing out the old one with theatrical reluctance that made customers laugh, even as they struggled to work out what anything cost. Your gran refused to use the new money for weeks, insisting on paying in shillings and receiving that foreign change back with a scowl that suggested personal betrayal. And elderly customers stood longer in queues counting coins they'd never seen before, while younger shoppers breezed through with the new pennies they'd mastered in an afternoon. The confusion bred opportunity. Some shopkeepers rounded prices up, claiming conversion complications, while others genuinely couldn't calculate fast enough during the morning rush. And kids discovered that new pennies fit perfectly into sixpence slots on vending machines until someone caught on and the machines got fixed. Max Bygraves released a song called Decimalization that played on the radio constantly, trying to explain why a pound now divided into 100 instead of 240, though nobody thought it helped. The phrase heard everywhere was, "How much is that in old money?" And it meant you didn't trust the new numbers. Couldn't accept that everything you'd known about counting change had vanished overnight. Power cuts arrived without warning. Usually during tea, when your mum had 3 pots on the stove and the oven timer counting down, one moment you had lights and the next darkness swallowed the kitchen whole. She kept candles in the drawer and a torch by the stairs while homework happened by candlelight. Your exercise book glowing in a small circle that made everything beyond it disappear. The telly shut off at 10:30 every night anyway. Not that it mattered when the power vanished at random, because the coal miners' strike meant commercial users got electricity only 3 consecutive days per week, and nobody knew which 3 days until the lights came on or stayed dark. Families gathered in front rooms that smelled of cooling radiators and melting wax. You ate dinner fast when the lights worked because you never knew how long they'd last, and reading by candlelight became as normal as learning your times tables, while the rest of the house sat cold and dim. Thursday night, November 21st, 1974, 8:25. 2 bombs went off within minutes of each other. The mulberry bush at the foot of the rotunda and the tavern in the town down in New Street. Both pubs had been packed. Workers finishing their week, students meeting friends, couples on dates. 21 people killed, 182 injured. The explosions turned Thursday evening into something nobody in Birmingham would forget. Your dad came home from work silent. He'd walked past the mulberry bush every day, could have been in there, and anyone could have been in there. That's what made it different from seeing disasters on the news. This was your streets, your pubs, your city centre, where you'd walked 1,000 times without thinking twice about safety or checking bags or wondering if today was the day something went wrong. Birmingham changed that week. Not loudly, quietly the way cities do when something breaks inside them. Pubs emptied earlier. People checked carrier bags on the bus with new suspicion. Your mum stopped going into town on Saturdays for a month, and when she finally went back, she walked faster, scanned more, relaxed less. The wreckage got cleared within days, but the wariness stayed for years, settling into the bones of the city like cold that wouldn't leave. 6 men got arrested within hours. Irish lads who'd been living in Birmingham for years, working ordinary jobs and drinking in ordinary pubs. They confessed, went to prison as the Birmingham Six. 16 years later, everyone would learn they'd been innocent all along, beaten and coerced into confessing to murders they didn't commit. But in November 1974, nobody in Birmingham knew that yet. The city went quiet after that. Not silent, just careful in ways it hadn't been before, watching and waiting and never quite trusting the same way again. 4 months earlier, the rotunda had been evacuated. A bomb discovered in the building before it could detonate July 15, 1974, and your older sister had been shopping in the bull ring when the alarm went off. She came home shaken, saying police had cordoned off half of New Street while crowds stood behind barriers, watching officers in protective gear examine suspicious packages that turned out to be real. Between 1973 and November, around 50 bombs went off across Birmingham. At the railway station, post offices, pubs nobody had heard of until they made the news. Most hit buildings rather than people, so nobody died in those earlier ones. But the math was obvious, and everyone could do it. You learned to spot unattended bags. Understood that suspicious packages meant police tape and detours. Absorbed the knowledge that bomb scares happened in Belfast, except now they happened here too. Birmingham in the 1970s exists only in memories now. Subscribe for more stories from the decade that changed everything. Trevor Francis made his debut at 16 in 1970, scored 4 goals against Bolton before his 17th birthday, and within a year, everyone in the city knew who he was. Superboy in the number 8 shirt. Flowing hair, electric pace, the kind of footballer who made you believe in something bigger than second division mid-table mediocrity that Blues had settled into like old furniture. St Andrews became the place to be on match days. 49,000 people crammed in during March 1971 to watch Blues play Cardiff, while 4 months earlier only 14,000 had turned up for Sheffield Wednesday. The difference? Francis was hitting form, and people came to see what he'd do next because he always did something worth seeing. Skipping past defenders like they weren't there. Finishing with either foot because it didn't matter which one he used. Your dad took you once, maybe twice if you were lucky. Even from the back of the cop, you could see him move differently from everyone else on the pitch, quicker and sharper and always half a step ahead of defenders trying to hack him down. When Nottingham Forest paid £1 million for him in February 1979, it hurt even though it felt inevitable. Britain's first £1 million footballer, and he was yours first. Saturday morning meant queuing outside ATV Centre on Broad Street, hoping they'd pick you for the cage. Studio 3 where they filmed Tiswas, and the cage was exactly what it sounded like. They locked kids in and threw buckets of water over them, while everyone screamed and the cameras kept rolling. Sounds grim. Felt like winning the lottery. Inside was controlled chaos. Chris Tarrant, Sally James, Bob Carroll-G's with Spit the dog, a puppet that literally spat water at people. And the whole place smelled of wet carpet and shaving foam because they'd used 23 litres of foam per episode, along with 120 custard pies. The floor stayed sticky all day because nobody cleaned up properly between segments, and it filmed live with no retakes, so if someone swore it went out, and if a kid slipped and cracked their head, the cameras just kept rolling. Lenny Henry would show up sometimes, mucking about and making things messier. Jasper Carrot launched the dying fly dance on the show, people lying on their backs kicking arms and legs in the air, and it looked ridiculous, but everyone did it anyway because that was the whole point. The catchphrase was, "This is what they want," shouted at full volume before something got destroyed, and kids in the audience would scream it back while teachers hated it and parents thought the whole show was a bad influence. Too loud, too messy, too much pie throwing. Which is exactly why kids loved it. Started in 1974 as a Midlands-only show, national by 1976, and suddenly Birmingham was making the Saturday morning programme everyone talked about on Monday. The library opened January 12, 1974, squatting in Paradise Circus like a brutalist spaceship that had landed and decided to stay. John Madden designed it as an inverted ziggurat, originally supposed to be clad in marble until budget cuts changed that to pre-cast grey panels that looked exactly as expensive as they were, which is to say, not very. The largest non-national library in Europe, and your mum called it that ugly thing, while your art teacher called it visionary, and Prince Charles would later call it a place where books went to be incinerated rather than kept. Nobody called it beautiful. People either loved it or hated it, and mostly they hated it. But it was yours. uniquely and aggressively and unapologetically a building that could only exist in Birmingham and nowhere else. Gravelly Hill Interchange. 559 columns holding up multiple levels of motorway serving 18 routes across 30 acres. And the name Spaghetti Junction came from a Birmingham Evening Mail journalist called Roy Smith, who looked at the plans in 1965, years before it was built, and decided Gravelly Hill Interchange wouldn't stick the way Spaghetti Junction would. Opening day was May 24th, 1972, and it felt like an event. Families drove through just to say they had. Navigating all those curves and rises and merges, while columns reached 80 feet high and roads stacked on top of each other in ways that looked impossible until you were actually driving through them. Cliff Richard made a film there the next year called Take Me High. Nobody remembers the plot, but everyone remembers those stark columns against the sky. Some days the whole city smelled of chocolate, thick and sweet and unmistakable, drifting from the Bourneville factory 4 miles south where thousands worked. And when the wind blew right, the smell reached Birmingham until you'd be walking to school, and suddenly the air tasted like melted chocolate. Your mum would open the kitchen window and declare it a Cadbury day, with the same satisfaction as if the weather forecast had promised sunshine and delivered exactly that. Other cities had steel mills or shipyards. You had chocolate. The scent meant jobs and the factory working and normalcy in a decade that often felt anything but normal. And nobody questioned why the whole city occasionally smelled like a sweet shop, because that was just how things were. The bull ring sprawled across the city centre in angular shapes that made the old Victorian markets look quaint by comparison. The rotunda towered over everything. 25 stories of cylindrical tower you could see from anywhere, while inside the shopping centre, split across levels, connected by escalators that always seemed to be breaking down. Saturday shopping with your mum meant crowds and noise, and the smell of fruit stalls mixed with exhaust from Smallbrook Queensway running underneath. The indoor market upstairs sold everything, while outdoor stalls below carried on the tradition of the old bull ring markets that had existed for centuries. And C&A and Woolworths and Littlewoods occupied the modern shops that felt different from department stores in ways you couldn't articulate, but definitely felt. The escalators up to the rotunda viewing gallery let you see the whole city from the top, spreading out in all directions before shopping centres looked like everywhere else and the bull ring still felt like somewhere unique. The 70s in Birmingham brought decimal confusion and bombs that changed what safety meant and power cuts in winter. But also Trevor Francis dancing past defenders and Tiswas filming live on Saturday mornings, and a library that looked like nothing else in Britain. Subscribe for more stories from Birmingham in the decade that survived everything. What do you remember most? Tell us in the comments.